Anyway, it's my great pleasure to welcome you tonight. This is the first of our art lectures for the semester. The art department hosts an art lecture each month, and then at the end of each semester we have a student art show. So for this month, we decided to show the art of theater. Now most of you know we have an awesome theater department. The applause sign worked, right? I'm trying to get people to put that in my art history class so I can use it at the end of the lines. Anyway, there's a few things that I'll talk about quickly and then we'll get on with it. This unique show tonight is featuring objects that have been used in Bethany's theater history for the last several years, and the history has been going on much longer. But we have, the reason why we're so awesome, the reason why the Bethany Theater Department is great, is because our faculty they're just not trying to put on a play. They're also creators. They also make things, they compose things, they design things. Whether it's a play, whether they're writing original plays, or writing original music, designing original costumes and props, and designing sets. They're going beyond what they have to do to create theater for us. The season is posted on a large poster, but we have smaller posters too for you to take with you, a souvenir to put up in your dorm room. So the theater also has productions going on coming up September 23rd with Theater Physics. We have three speakers tonight. The first one is Pete Bloedel, who is a longtime theater director here at Bethany. He's also a playwright. And he has an AA degree from Bethany Lutheran College. I was already teaching here when he was here. His one regret was not taking any of my classes. He went on to get a Bachelor of Arts degree from Gustavus Adolphus and then a Master of Arts degree from Minnesota State, Mankato, in approximately 1997. Our second speaker tonight is Benji Inniger, who works with sound and he is a composer. He has a bachelor's degree from Bethany Lutheran College in theater and a Master of Fine Arts from Minnesota State and Mankato in sound design and theater from 2010. Our third speaker is Emily Kimball, and she is a costume designer, seamstress extraordinaire, and has an MFA in theater and I believe with an emphasis in costume design. There's two other people that Pete will talk about too that deserve some credit in the show. One is Jake Yenish, who left for a different post, and also John Merseth, who has helped put the ideas into physical reality. John, of course, works with the constructing of the sets, these amazing sets that we've had, and Jake worked primarily with lighting. So, the format will be three different speakers that they'll be here afterwards. We have a reception with some food, and we also have harp music. So I don't know if you could ask for more than that. The artists will be here to talk to you individually. And also, if you have questions during their talk, I think they'll take questions either during or after. Without any further ado, please welcome Pete Bloedel.
Thanks, Bill. I might wander away from the microphone a little bit here and there, but I've been trained in theater, so I think I can be loud enough. Just quickly, I will show you some pictures. I'll talk a little bit. We had to ask Bill, what does a person talk about when they do an art lecture like this, because this is our first one. We've been doing a lot of art, but a lot of times theater art doesn't get credit because it's not art for art's sake. It's art for something else's sake. It's kind of like program music. It's program art. It's stuff that you do for a different purpose, for an actual performance, for something that's that is generally unarchived and is happening in the moment. And so, just quickly, I'll start out by showing you just a few things about me. This is me, and as you can see, I grew up on the wrong side of the tracks. I was a rough kid, had a thug life. No, just kidding. I think that's a birch twig or something. But I was a very inquisitive youngster. I remember that I grew up with my mom was a stay-at-home mom, and so I remember distinct things from my childhood, like we had a noon whistle in our, I grew up in Brooklyn Center, Minnesota, which is pretty much considered Minneapolis now. But there was a noon whistle at the fire department, and so when the noon whistle went off, I just remember it was time to go in for lunch. I remember that I had time to sit and watch the clouds go by. My childhood was fairly unregimented. Is it any doubt that I would somehow gravitate towards the arts? I remember when my mom did once sign me up for City League softball, where other kids were like, yeah, hey, are you doing that? I was like, no! And I was okay. I got most valuable, or most improved player, Not most valuable. But later, this is when I was 13, I started juggling, and notice how both these pictures are in black and white. That ought to tell you a little something about the times, because that's what the world was back then. It was black and white. There was no color as I was growing up. But I remember distinctly getting these torches, and my mom I had to really sell it to my mom. So, Mom, they're $15 each. I've saved up the money, all these other things, and she said, no, because if you, I don't want you juggling torches. What's it going to lead to later? And then, of course, it did lead. And so this is back. You'll notice Tigan back when Tigan it didn't have the protrusion that it has now. But Tigan was just the men's dorm. And yes, back in the day, Tigan was 2 people to a room. Is it again? I don't know. But we had roommates, and I was in a quad. When I came to Bethany, I had 4 people in one of those rooms. And I remember coming to Bethany and not liking Bethany at all. I was like, where are the people? Because I had a graduating class of 575 people, and I came to a college that was smaller than my graduating class. It freaked me out, and I didn't like it. But, like so many people, I'm all in. The Bethany bug bit me, and I love it. This is my family. You see I've got my wife Sarah here. We've been married happily for 23 years. This is I'll start by oldest. That's Hans, he's my oldest. My second oldest is Emma. They both are students here at Bethany. This is Greta, and she goes to Minnesota Valley Lutheran High School in New Ulm, and so does Ingrid, who just is now in 9th grade. So I have no kids in elementary school anymore, which is kind of freaks me out. And I met Sarah here at Bethany, too. I started, like a lot of people in theater, as an actor. The juggling thing led to one kind of performance gig to another. In 1986, I was the juggler at Valley Fair, and by the way, I'm trying to go fast because I know there's other speakers after me. So I'm trying to give you the quick synopsis here. But in 1986, I was the Valley Fair juggler. That led to some commercials. I did some auditions. This image in the middle was on like 12 billboards in Orlando, Florida, and I was on a commercial down there. And then I was in a lot of different plays. Many of you, though you don't know it, if you've ever gone to the Guthrie with me, you've probably seen this guy on stage a lot. That's Rob Berdahl, and he's a number of... I wanted to talk about Bob Ross. Okay, so I know I've known Bill a long time. I do regret never taking a class from Bill. Bill and I have become friends, and one thing in our conversations, we get sometimes talking about Bob Ross, and that he's not an artist. But, okay, so I would say that one thing that is great about Bob Ross is that he actually he's not necessarily teaching you how to be an artist, because art entails actually thinking about something else and coming up with concepts. There's a mental process there instead of just happy little clouds. Sometimes it's actually, no, this cloud means something, you know, it's got a meaning. But the great thing about watching Bob Ross as I grew up, I was a kid who was, you know, I would, when I was sick at home, I'd sit there and, you know, my mom would let me watch TV and Faker, Bob Ross. And so Bob Ross was a great painter of technique. And that's what scene painting is. I'm not saying that, you know, these things that we paint are necessarily great works of thought. But they're great works, maybe not great, but they're works of technique. There's technique, there's things that you learn, kind of what I would say is the grammar of painting. And so Bob Ross was great for that. Back in, oh my goodness, I don't even have a year here. This is the first set I ever designed. Down here in the corner, right here, this is Sig Lee. I was very blessed when I was, after I got my bachelor's degree, I was thinking about seminary, and I started taking Greek. But then Sig asked me, while I took a year off and I was taking some languages, and Sig asked me if I would help him out with the play. The play was Detective Story by Sidney Kingsley, and it was supposed to be like a New York detective precinct, and so he asked me if I would help out, and that's when the bug really bit. So I kind of knew something about scenery, but now suddenly I was asked to do a set. But really what I wanted to do was, what I really wanted to do was direct. But I went to graduate school more or less to be a director of plays. But the interesting thing is, this set thing never really left me. So as I was going through graduate school, I took a lot of stagecraft classes, I took scene painting classes, I took rigging classes, I took welding classes. I took a lot of things that you wouldn't necessarily think a director would take. I was very, very interested and steeped into the technical side of theater. So then I got hired at Bethany Lutheran College, and there's a whole long story I can go in about how that actually happened, but I won't go into that today. This is one of my first set designs as a faculty member. This is The Importance of Being Earnest, the first time I did it. And basically it was just a thumbnail sketch of what I thought I wanted to see. But then I started thinking, man, I was looking at a lot of pictures, and then I started just drawing more things. So this is the next thumbnail sketch of The Importance of Being Earnest. And it had a lot of cross-hatching, a lot of different patterns on the walls, and I thought, man, I'll get conceptual. One of my first shows here, I'm going to get really conceptual. And I wanted the whole thing to look kind of like a Norwegian sauna. And so I got adept at painting. I think half of my life has been painting wood to look like other wood. And this is no exception. I've become pretty good at faking it pretty well. And this is my wife. That's not our kid. I'm not sure whose kid that is, actually. That might be my niece. I'm now wood graining a bunch of boards, and you can see here that once it's up, that's what it ended up looking like. And then with the lights, and I did want to talk a little bit about lights because we just lost our lighting designer. Lights are one of those things that really does help bring things to life. I'll just sort of go back. You can see there's that back wall. It's all these boards and things, but bang, dramatic now. You know, lights do a lot, do an awful lot. And I know that Jake was often fond of saying, if you're doing your job right as a lighting designer, people don't know you've done anything at all. And I think that's sometimes true. I don't think that's true here. I think this is very vivid. This is something that is quite striking. And you can look at a lot of these pictures. And I want you to pay special attention to not only the scenery, not only the costumes, but pay attention to the light. Because the light really does bring things to life. It creates a sense of drama, and it's all visual. It's completely visual. You're now creating it's a new piece of the grammar. Right? You know what I mean by grammar is that, you know, before you could learn how to read and write, you had to know ABCs, you had to understand how the letters fit together, how to create words. Well, lighting is one of those things. It's part of the grammar. When you put it together with other things, now you know how to create bigger things. You know how to create productions. And you know how to create environments. And that's one of the exciting things I think about theater is we're into, and by the way, I want to make sure that you understand this is not a drama department we have here at Bethany Lutheran College. This is a theater department. Drama would mean just the text and just the acting. I was never into theater because I was only into acting. As a matter of fact, when I first got here to Bethany College, I remember at my first faculty meeting, I was trying to get some other classes started. The only class that existed here when I came was acting. And I was trying to get a stagecraft class, an introduction to theater class, and a number of practica passed through the faculty. And I remember Cynthia Weber, bless her heart, was a chemistry professor at the time. She raised her hand and she said, "Peter, are there other classes besides acting and theater?" And my jaw, after I picked my jaw up off the ground, I said, "Yes, I have a whole master's degree." Yay. And I said, there's a bunch of things that you can take. And part of this is creating these environments. Okay, so design kind of became a really important thing to me. It started for me being an actor, but now I was interested in directing. Because I had a job now in directing, I had things that I wanted to see a certain way. And this trickles over into my everyday life. These were trellises that I made something like these for when I directed Our Town. Our Town's supposed to be a really simple show. It's not supposed to have any scenery really, but I wanted it to have some kind of design element. And so there were these things, I can only call them trellises, and they were so good that I gave some away, and I ended up keeping some for myself and put them in my garden. And I just love them because, and then in the winter, it's this. It's just, somehow it's just really interesting. Okay, why is this in here? Well, because design is not only scenery. It's got a lot of pictures, there's a lot of things of scenery and props, and I wanted to talk just quickly about props. This nose thing, I'm directing theater physics right now. Shout out to the theater physics cast, we've met twice. They'll be rehearsing tonight after the show. And so you start with something. Sometimes props just means you start with something. Well, we've all seen the Groucho Marx nose. I think it's only missing the mustache. I think I already ripped that off. Then, I had to rip off the eyebrows. I needed a big giant nose. So I brought, that's kind of, this is floral foam. That you just, after a while, you start, what are props? Well, I'm actually, I think, in my mind, a better sculptor than I am a drawer. I draw fine, draw okay, but you never know. Sometimes you might find yourself better at 3 dimensions than you are at 2 dimensions, and hence these wigs and things. To me, this is easier. Making this was easier because now, because I can look at my nose, I can feel my nose, I can kind of know what my nose would look like because it's already in 3D. And so to make another, a little. This, by the way, it needed an elastic strap. But so now, I needed a nose that was bigger. It's kind of like a nose job. Big giant one. So that's something, and this is just made out of things you can just buy around. It's made out of floral foam, rock hard putty, and nobody teaches you these things necessarily. Now it's the internet. You can find a lot of stuff on the internet, but sometimes you just make it up. And that's what I love too, is problem solving. I want you to see, I'm holding this model right here, this is the voice of the prairie, but I was always into trying to make the actual set look just about as exactly like the model as we possibly could. To me, that's sort of important. So this is actually the actual set. Notice what happens when we add paint, it starts really coming alive. Notice what happens when we add lights, it comes alive even more. And there's grass and there's all these other things that are happening in this particular thing. And this guy in the, not him, way back there, that's John Merseth. I'm going to talk about him in a little bit. And then I'm going to field some questions, and I'm just trying to keep my time, I'm just trying to keep it moving, so I'm sorry if the scene's rushed. This right here is one of my favorite sets. This is the set to A Christmas Carol. But it's nothing yet. But first of all, you have to start with a plan. Nowadays, we sometimes do models that are actual models, and then other times we do digital models. This was a digital model, and I was able to give this to John Merseth, who was our technical director, and still is in a little bit of a different capacity right now. And so the first thing we have to do is get the idea of where do things go on the stage. So notice how we have the stage taped out. I'm a guy who really likes phases, and so I wanted to show you those because maybe you like those too. So this is the first phase. And then you start adding the walls, the structure, the things that are going to hold up the second story. And now you start building the second story. And you have to make it support because you got a big giant drawer that's going to go underneath, we call it like a garage, so we have a big drawer that's going to come under there. So you have to have a little certain knowledge of engineering, and if you don't know about engineering, you have to find out from somebody, So we're always asking questions from those who know, because we want to make sure everything's safe. And then you start adding the walls that help holding the rest of it up. Notice we've got the drawer in there. This whole thing does move out and in. And then you start adding the big window in front of it that flies up and down. And that's a lot of planning because you got to make sure that that's hooked up to a bar above there. There's not a bar everywhere. So you got to make sure you're designing your set to be under something that can move. All right, and then you start adding the floor. The floor was something that I had to do. Sometimes we pull all-nighters in the theater because the show has to go on. And if I'm a director, I know what I want to see. And if I'm a designer, I know what I want to make be seen for that director. And sometimes I'm the director too. for myself. And I was for this show. I wanted cobblestones on the ground. Now notice, remember when I went back to that first show that I ever designed, that green set? There was no painting on that floor, that was just the board. So what we had to do is we had to quickly figure, well, we want paint on the floor. That's something that really ties the set in. If you paint the floor, now it seems like it's coming out at you. It's real, it's tactile, you feel like you want to touch it. And so we had to put masonite down on the ground to make sure that we could actually paint it. I remember I got kind of yelled at for that because people saw that I was painting the stage. I had to assure them I wasn't painting the actual stage. But I've learned sometimes you just ask for forgiveness later. And so I was, Bill's laughing. And so believe it or not, all these cobblestones were painted by a big giant 4x8 stencil. So you make the stencil once and then you move it around all over the place and then you spray it with a spray gun. So there's fast techniques. It's not like I'm going in with a paintbrush and painting each one of those because that would be a little bit time intensive. And then, of course, now, the dramatic lighting. Look how things change once. This is what it looked like when the audience entered the show. Okay, scene painting, real quickly. This is just a sky. What this is called is a scene painting technique called a graded wash. It's so easy if you're doing this with a computer, but if you're making something big, you gotta do it with paint. And so you start with water. You start with a canvas, and then you put a lot of water on it, and it's basically like watercolors. We're using acrylic paint. And by the way, I don't want to give the impression that we don't use stuff done by computers, because we're always doing that. But you can't do a drop like this on a computer without spending almost too much money. And so we're still doing the human thing. You put this on the floor, we want to work wet, so we're doing these drops on the floor, you're getting them wet, and then we use the spray gun. My friend, the spray gun helps you make clouds, things like this. You can make little clouds. This is for a show called Metamorphoses, where we actually built a swimming pool in the theater. Same technique over here. You'll notice right here, I started with a big giant piece of muslin, taped it, and stapled it down to the floor, get it completely wet, so it's all wet, and then I start spattering paint on it. If you guys know who Jackson Pollock is, I'm just throwing paint at the piece. Until you get something that's just all different colors. I got blue in here, I got black in here, gray, tan, things that look to me like space, because I'm trying to paint a moon in space. Okay, I wanted to make sure that it has this tan stuff in here because I want, space just isn't black. You want it to look like when you're out there in a satellite photo, maybe it looks dramatic like that. And so then I add the stars. For me it was, how do you make stars? I wanted to look realistic. A paintbrush and painted little white X's. And then I took my spray gun and put it right up next to the work and just went like that. And then it just made this cool little haze around each star. And then I had to have the moon. You can now you understand that I'm talking about that drop right there. The drop is short for backdrop. The drop had to have a moon in it. Well, you can't see through the moon, so I had to have a big black circle first. And then we start adding that little banana, that little slice of that fingernail thing that makes the moon pop out. So all of that's the step-by-step thing. Those are scene painting techniques. When you're rummaging around and kind of looking through the show, I hope you guys will look up at the different steps in how to create a weathered fence up there, because that's basically, those are the main scene painting techniques that we use all the time. This is the pool for that show. Notice how it's in the house. We had to take four rows of chairs out for that, and we had to start building a pool. This is directed by Benji Inniger. And then we had to have some columns. Benji was also the designer for this, and so he would give me things and say, I want things to look like this. This is one where I talked him into actually letting me make some marble columns morph into space columns. He said yes, and I said awesome, and then we did it. And that's what they look like. That's Benji right there. You can sort of see that the columns start marble looking, and then they morph up into space, and then they've got that capital. I'll go back. This capital right here is just made out of window shims. So we're just using stuff that we've got around the shop. A lot of times if you paint things right, it looks expensive, but it's just found objects. A lot of people, I continually get asked, who's our printer for our floor? There's people who actually, even our last KCACTF respondent came up and said, are you getting a film for this floor? How do you get that? What are you doing that? And it just blows my mind that they don't know that that's scene painting, because I guess I thought every theater artist would probably know. But each of these, for every show, I repaint the stage every time. And so I do, like I said, I live my life seeing wood and painted boards. I just see them all the time. It's like, I can't get it out of my head. And it's not just that, sometimes it's tile. This is a countertop. And that's just doing spattering, and it looks like a countertop even if you're like right up next to it. That's what it looks like, but it's scene painted. These tiles, we made each one of these tiles, I painted each one of them. And there's a fast way to do it too, so it's not like you have to just, it's not like it's not what you think. You're doing it in mass and you're doing it fast, but it all happens quickly. And then that's what the whole thing looks like when you add the lighting, bang, now it's an apartment in New York and it looks cool. This is above board. One of the interesting things that I had to do 2 years ago is I had to figure out how to make birch, because I designed the set to have birch wood in the set. And so I talked to my technical director, John Merseth, and I said, John Merseth, you are the technical director, help me, the designer, we have to figure out how to get birch wood on the set. Well, what we learned is John, who's one of the most industrious guys I've ever met. What I love about John is he's one of these creative people. If you tell him a problem like that, he never says no, he just says, let me sleep on it. I love that answer. Love it, love it, love it. So anyways, he found birch logs. He got some from up north. We got them shipped in. But what we learned is that they were just too heavy to use. They weren't practical. Because we had to move these things around, so we didn't have a way to use them. But I stripped the birch bark off of one, and then I had like a cardboard tube. You can see here that I tried putting it on a cardboard tube. That took me, just that one, took me about 5 hours. So I said, I gotta do something else. So I went back to scene painting. I went to the bookstore, I got mat board, put it on the ground, I started throwing paint at it, I got it wet, I started dragging the spatter droplets out, and then I started taking my sponge and I started putting moss in. And a lot of people kind of go, why would you do this? Well, the thing is, it's because we designed it this way. If we designed it this way, why don't we try to get what we want? And I believe in working for what you've designed for. I believe in it. And here are samples of the actual birch. What I did find is if you actually tape little bits of the birch bark onto the fake birch bark, it sells it even better. You got it curling off there. And this is, by the way, a sample of this is in the hallway out there, so you can actually see that all it is it's just paper stapled to a board. And it's half round, and I remember during this show, during intermission, every show I would see people kind of come up and walk onto the stage, and they're not supposed to do that, but they come up and they were touching the wood to see. Somehow I privately liked that a lot. You can see here where this is a brand new thing to me. I'm going to shoot myself in the eye, I think. Okay, this right here is that's the birch wood, and if you go to the next one, you can see it even better. And so, by the way, too, in the theater, we don't have any wing space in our particular theater, so we have to get good at hiding things. And so what's neat about this particular set is that it's hiding in plain sight. This is the ice house. This is the whole big thing where the Minnesotans, they're fishing on the ice. It's a giant ice house. It's hidden. You're looking at it. It's still right there. You just can't see it. Because why? Because we're lighting it differently, and we've got it pushed to the background. But it's right there. You're still looking at it. We had the whole thing pivot. But we don't have any wings, so we can't push it off to the stage. All we had to do is turn it around, and then this is what the audience gets to see. And it's such a startling transformation that we wanted people to actually see it happen. And it was the thing that happened right before intermission. Okay, so this is John Merseth. You heard me talk about it. I know, it's the only picture I can get. I know, it's on our website. And so, what does a technical director do? Well, a technical director is, I make designs, okay? So if I do these pictures, if I make these designs, this is for the Importance of Being Earnest, last spring's show, and the Importance of Being Earnest has to have 3 different locations, 3 different scene changes. So I bring these pictures up to John and I say, okay, this is what we're gonna have, this is what we want, this is the goal, this is what we're shooting for. And John goes, let me sleep on it. And then he comes back and then he figures out, the greatest thing about, I used to be the technical director, but the greatest thing is ever since John came, now I can actually design stuff that I don't know how to build because I trust him more than I trust me as far as building stuff. He's a genius, he knows what he's doing. And so I come up with these shapes and things, John comes up with this. He starts figuring out jigs to make the trim that's going all around that false proscenium there. This looks like a model, this is the actual thing. Isn't that clean? It looks like a balsa wood model, but this is the actual stage, and this is the infrastructure that he starts creating just based on my pictures. And it actually is a three-dimensional model. I mean, he can go around and take all the dimensions that I've got, but, and then it's constant talk. We're always talking. And so this is how it grows. The whole thing is done on a revolve, so we can spin the whole set to make the three different things happen. You can sort of see that record player, you know, it's the big turntable right there where that circle is. That whole thing spins. Some of you were here to see the show. And then again, boom, Jake Yanish, you add the lights. Now it comes to life. This is stuff that he calls, all this frou-frou stuff up here, he calls that light vomit. and it's a fantastic thing that he's able to make all these patterns, because, you know, what are we involved in design? We're line, shape, mass, measure, position, color, texture, all these things. Now we've got texture. Things look dramatic. Some of your friends. More friends. And then, okay, and by the way too, so this is the garden scene, so the whole thing is, this is what it looks like outside. Then for the next scene it turns around, and then you see that it looks something like this. And so, and then this is the team, this is, these are the guys who are going to be talking. I'm sure I've gone over my time. And then that's Jake Yanish, the guy I've been talking about, the guy that we sent off to Oklahoma Baptist University. Okay, so that's all I've got. I will take questions while Benji comes up, and we're going to swap out computers. He's going to talk a little bit more about some of the stuff that he does as far as design goes. But quickly, we can take questions at the very, very end too, but we do have some time while we're swapping out computers. Does anybody have any quick questions? Sorry. Okay, I'll tell a joke while he's setting up. There's, what do you, no, I don't even have one. I can't even do it. Are we in? Almost. Okay. You want to use my clicker? No. I'll just put it right there. Okay, so we'll have some more questions at the end if you have any questions, but will you guys please give a big round of applause to Benji Inniger.
This was really interesting because we kind of had a rough idea of what the three of us were going to talk about. Mine is very, very different from Pete's, which let's say that's a good thing. And so, which is kind of fun. And so, like, I was trying to decide how I wanted to approach this. And a couple things I just wanted to reiterate that Pete kind of mentioned. Is that number one, well, I should mention sort of where I come from here too. The thing that brought me to theater was music. I started out as a music major, music kid, and I found my, long story short, I found my niche doing music for theater. A thing before this I never even thought existed. And because it was kind of a niche that was previously sort of unfulfilled, I got a lot of experience doing it. Which was a great, great blessing, because it really sort of, it's God's plan. It's you show up thinking that you're going to do one thing, and you end up, completely changing up and end up doing something else for, the rest of your life. So it's pretty crazy how that always works. And the other thing that, just to bring up here too, is very similar to what Pete mentioned here too, is we titled this art show The Art of Theater. It could also very easily be called The Art of Problem Solving. And that's why I think theater in particular is so at home and has a nice home in a liberal arts institution like this. Because you get to, problem solving is not a one compass thing. It's you have to use every corner of your brain. You have to try to do all sorts of different things. So like just kind of speaking personally, the things that theater has kind of brought me over the years, like I said, music. I do a lot of music in the year, but over the years, it's turned into sound design and directing and photography and graphic design and electronics and carpentry and marketing and all of this stuff that I would have never sought experience for, but I found all of it in theater over the years, and I think that's pretty cool, and why I think like theater and liberal arts are they're buds. They're buds. So to prove a point, there was one show several years ago that I had to Photoshop something, and I never really used Photoshop before. And this was a very last-second add to this presentation as of about 40 seconds ago. To supplement Pete's picture of John Mercer, this is my favorite picture of John Mercer. that this came about is because I had to learn Photoshop. And it's like, how am I going to practice Photoshop? John's a pretty awesome looking guy. He looked pretty sweet, sitting on the Game of Thrones, the Game of Thrones throne, and so there he is. And that's how we learned Photoshop. But that's kind of the idea, is that there's a problem and that you need to pool the resources and pool your collaborators and stuff to solve those problems. And there's examples all over this lobby of how we do that. Some of my most favorite projects, Pete talked a lot about Metamorphoses. I remember coming to when we had that idea for that play. And the other thing that Pete left out was, John always says, I'll sleep on it, but that's after he's done punching you. Because he's too tired, he's got to go take a nap. So I remember that day when I pitched Metamorphoses, it's like, hey, let's build a 2,700-gallon heated and filtered pool in the middle of a theater. Which we had to call in professional electricians and city inspectors and all these people. It was a huge undertaking, but it was problem solving. It was all collaborative problem solving, and we got it done, and it didn't leak a drop, which is great. And it was probably my favorite show of all time. I love it. And then also things like, if you head upstairs later, I'm really proud of the fire pit thing that just last year we did for the Women of Troy. We wanted a bunch of fire effects on stage, and I had a first idea which was absolutely completely idiotic, and then Pete added to that, and John added to that, Jake added to, and so like we just kept building off of each other's, and ultimately have the really super cool fire pit up there that you'll see up there, and it smokes and everything. It's rad. I'm going to specifically more so talk about music and how I approach music for theater. And so because this is a theater presentation, I'm going to talk about video games. And why I think that's cool is not only is theater sort of the art of problem solving, but it's also sort of the it's the evolution of inspiration. Everybody has some kind of evolution of inspiration. There's something inspiring you at all times, and what the last 2 years have been a really changing time for me in terms of how I approach music for theater, because I started working in video games. And I never really equated those things, but I started thinking, you know what, there's a lot of these two things that these two mediums can learn from each other, and maybe I can make both better. And so, just to kind of go back really quick, so of many of the different, you could say visual mediums, there's kind of a sliding scale of adaptability, right? How much the music needs to adapt and conform to whatever the medium is. So probably more on the static side of it is film. Audio gets mixed and gets printed to film, whether that's a file or a DVD or whatever, and the intention is that it never ever changes. The only thing that changes is the overall volume, but if you're doing a film, you never want that to change. Although this is actually a little bit different. They're finding really cool ways to actually make, every time you watch, you pop in your Blu-ray, it has a different soundtrack or a different, that's changing too, but you kind of get the idea. Next down the sliding scale is theater. And we'll call theater kind of dynamic control. Theater by its nature needs to be adaptable. So if I'm approaching a play and I'm writing music for a play, what if an actor trips and is 5 seconds late for that cue? Happens all the time. What if somebody goes up on their lines? How do we adjust to that? There's a jillion things that can happen in theater that can make the timing imperfect and by nature, completely unstatic. So there has to be an adaptability to it. Moving down the line here, we have games. Games are very adaptable to the player. I'll get into this a little bit more specifically in a second, but whatever the player's doing, the music sort of follows. And then finally, live performance. And think about your favorite band on stage. For the most part, completely adaptive. Whatever tempo they start, whatever tempo they end on, and it's completely adaptive. And so that's kind of what I'm talking about when thinking about how music adapts to a dynamic environment. Looking at some of these things that these mediums do well, like games, for instance, have a personal responsiveness, and there's so much potential for immersion. The player, in these really well-done, well-written video games, the player can see their own selves within them, their own personalities, If you're more of a just like burst into the room and start like spraying bullets all over the place, the video game engine is going to adapt to that and do different things to reward you for that. If you're more of like a sneak around and do stuff, the engine is going to adapt to that and reward you for that. And so anytime that you as the controller of a thing can see yourself in it, then there's a huge potential for immersion. And then also kind of the availability and social significance of games right now. Games, not only VR, it's virtual reality is going to be everywhere in the next, several years. But also, it's 70% of households have some kind of game system in it. It's a something ridiculous like a $72 billion industry worldwide or something like that. It's everywhere. It's completely. You have video games in your pocket. I bet all but 3 of you have a video game in your pocket right now with your cell phone. I started playing Snake on my 1999 Nokia thing, and so they're completely ubiquitous. And all these things make it a very, very powerful tool. And so I started thinking about that. It's like, how can we take advantage of some of these things in theater? Theater does a lot of things really well too. I love the volatility of theater. I love it. And what I mean by that is, the word volatile probably doesn't actually belong here. It's more of a chemistry term, a chemical that evaporates very quickly under normal circumstances. But that's theater too. Theater happens once, it'll never happen the same way again, ever. And that I think is really special. It makes theater really special because you as an audience member or as a creator or an actor or whatever you're doing, you're part of a moment that will never be replicated again. And that's incredibly special. And even, and I love films and stuff like that too, but how many, or music, your favorite album or your favorite movie, how many times have you popped that thing into to have background noise, right? Not to pay attention to, not to immerse yourself in, but to have background noise because it's your favorite and it's comfortable and familiar. And it's just a very different thing. You don't go to the theater to create background noise, that would be silly. And so like that volatility of it, that sort of momentary fragileness of it, I think is really cool. And then finally, the visceral impact. And kind of what I mean by this is that you're not looking at a recorded person that, if you're watching TV and you try to reach out and touch that actor, you're just gonna get a handful of TV screen or whatever, right? An actor in theater is a live breathing person in front of you that it kind of makes the consequences more real, right? Think about something really violent. How many times do we see violence on TV, movies, etc.? How many, and how does that affect you? It's pretty easy to sort of, just kind of brush it off. If you see violence on stage, a realistic depiction of violence from somebody who's sitting 15 feet away from you, and you can see the sweat fly off their head, and you can, hear their breathing before and afterwards, makes a big difference. There's a tangibility to theater that I think is really special too. So, what does that have to do with music? Great question. I'm going to skip this because we are kind of running out of time. Sorry. So I started thinking about this. This is Metamorphoses. Oh, by the way, I'll get to that later. So this is Metamorphoses, and I'm just going to play this quietly in the background. And this is when I kind of started thinking about this, how music can adapt to the live environment. And so on the left here, we have David Ravenhild, on the right, Barrett Warren, and they're going to sing something for you. So there's a couple things that I think make that moment in particular pretty cool. What's going on music-wise, kind of behind the scenes, is that that I think is really magical and special, is that the music is following the actor. I'm not asking the actor to hold that note for 3 beats so the chord can change underneath him. I don't want him thinking about that. I want him in the moment, singing what they're feeling at that moment, and let me follow them. So if this works, that's good work. So this is, you can kind of see what's going on here. Oh, that I were a kingfisher. And then the chord can change whenever, this will go on till the power goes out, till Judgment Day, whatever happens, the music will wait for them. And then the second phrase, and then we breathe with the actors. We breathe, and then the chord changes. And so I think a lot of it is, and you can call it any time, you know, like let's breathe again, and the chord changes again. So the way that I kind of like to think about it is that in what you're doing with this computer programming and all this stuff for live playback is it's almost like taking the place of a conductor of an orchestra, right? Instead of something that's so static and that's just going to play underneath you and you know, and please adapt to it. You're taking your cues from that moment and taking the next thing. It's kind of like that idea. And so the big test for me with that, I know I'm going over time too, I'm sorry, is a couple of years ago we did Women of Troy. And this is when I really wanted to try to put this to the test. And so Women of Troy ultimately was a 62-minute score of music, and it was all pre-recorded with a viola, cello, and the Mary Martha chorus here at Bethany recorded it for me. I think I got some pictures. I'm gonna skip some stuff. I scored it like a game. One thing that made this work as a first experiment is that this was a busy semester. It was, I was the adapter, the director, composer, sound designer, which is great because I had that kind of ability to try some things without, I don't know, just more efficiently, I guess, if that makes any sense. The bad thing, of course, is that every time something's coming out of a singular mind, it is less collaborative, inherently less collaborative and inherently less interesting. So it came with pros and cons. We had our own translation and adaptation. So from the original Greek, Jacob Kempfert translated this thing from scratch from the ancient Greek. And so we had so much control over the text. And so I knew that going into it musically. And so we knew kind of exactly, we could do exactly what we wanted to do with it. Time, I started it a little over a year in advance. And so here's some of the, so we finally got to record this thing. You can see there Anne Fredrickson, conducting the Mary Martha. Everybody had headphones, everyone was on, you know, a singular metronome, and then down at the bottom here we have Ken Fried on viola and Sharon Rogers on cello. And so we recorded this stuff in a couple different ways. Number one, sections were through composed, and what I mean by that is just like a big chunk of music that I know I just want to be a big chunk of music. Nothing on stage is going to change, or if it does, I don't care. The music can continue and it's fine and I'll deal with it later. Another kind of strategy is through composed sections. And so what you're hearing, right, we're about to come up to D as you see on the score there. But it was recorded in small chunks. So we'd have like a 15-second chunk and then some like some audio material kind of in between that glues the two together that the audience members probably won't be aware of, but I can control in the computer that sounds kind of open-ended until we're ready to move on to the next section. So it's like chunk, chunk, chunk with this glue stuff in between that we can make all sound smooth live in the moment. So when the actor is ready, we take that thing. And then finally, blending layers and aleatory. And so what I mean by this is the beginning of the show, and not really how we used it in the show, but what you're going to hear Mary Martha sing now. We recorded this a bunch of different times and in different layers. So live on stage, I can sort of adapt the layers of the mix of that to sort of blend together and sound a little more cacophonous to make it sound really smooth, and I can make it sound as big as I want or as intimate as I want, and those things can kind of rise and fall with the action as I need them. And so there's just something really cool about one of my favorite moments, Amir's back there, is the first time Amir's character comes on stage, and he's always the bringer of bad news. You know, he's the messenger in this thing, and if you know Greek tragedy, that's how it works. But it was a subtle thing, but every time he was done with his first onset of bad news, it would end with his final punctuation with this every time, and the music would definitively end with that as opposed to like fade out, and it was so magical, and I loved it. So I guess that's kind of how I'm approaching, we can skip that. That's kind of how I'm approaching writing music to this. I do have some listening stations with some computers over here by the snacks, strategically placed. And so that has some examples of soundtracks that we've done and original music that we've made for our Bethany productions over there. But this has been a really interesting new way to sort of approach writing music. And this year, our two main stage productions, Sleepy Hollow and Anne, are going to be the highly heavy this stuff. I'm going to have original music for both. I'm going to, I'm getting out of myself, but yeah, come and check it out and think about that, knowing what you know now, and think about that. You know, like if you choose to pay attention to like what the music is doing and how it's kind of ushering things along, ask yourself who's paying attention to what, how is the music moving along, those kinds of things, and that's just kind of the basics of how I'm approaching that. So. I'm gonna turn it over to Emily, and I know we're kind of cruising through this for time and stuff, but we'll hang out if you guys have any questions or any thoughts or something after that. So thank you very much.
Shorter than these guys. Here. Okay, cool. For something a little different, I know Pete talked about texture, and as we were gathering things to put in this show, I was finding that just about everything that I decided I liked the most to display for all of you is very textured. That seems to be a very large theme in how I design things. So cool. So who am I? Well, I'm Emily Kimball. This is my 7th year. I'm beginning the 7th year as the costume designer and coordinator here at the Bethany Theater Department. So far, out of the 38, I think I counted, productions that I've designed so far, 22 of them have been at Bethany. So looking for Kiss Me Kate is going to be happy number 25. So I just graduated last spring from MSU with a MFA in theater design, costume design emphasis. And so I was a crazy person and I did a 4-year degree, or I did a 3-year degree in 4 years because I didn't want to say goodbye to this place and you can never get rid of me now. So, so while I was working here, I was also a full-time grad student over just across the ravine and up the other side of the hill, which was actually a really great blessing because I feel like strengthened a lot more of our ties. Pete went there, Benji's gone there, Jake went there for grad school, and so having another person in a slightly different department, I get to go borrow stuff all the time, so I'll talk about sourcing pretty soon too. So, so I was a student here from 2006 to 2010, and then I was involved with a handful of productions, both on stage and off stage. So how did I get here? Well, I first started as an awkward kid who had no idea what to do with their lives. And my training in theater began, I was in my high school years. I was a homeschooled kid, had no clue what to do, and my mom signed me up for something, and I hated that. And so it was like an open call workshop kind of thing. They were auditioning at some local community theater, and I was like, fine, I'll go, but they're not gonna make me sing. Well, I sang. And she picked me up, and I apparently had like stars in my eyes, and I was like, I'm doing this forever! And she's like, I told you so, so thanks, Mom. She's probably watching somewhere. So then, it was a really great group of people, and it was just really wonderful at such a weird time. I think I turned 14. Who was 14 and like had no clue what was going on? That was me. And I found a bunch of kids who that was okay. And so from that, I met my best friend. I met my first voice teacher. I was in a handful of those productions. And then the theater closed, and then it came time for me to start looking for college. And I came to Bethany, and I bought this sweatshirt, and my mom was like, so you're gonna go here, right? I was like, yeah, I think I am. So, long story short. So I was a theater major while I was here, and the worst thing that could have ever happened to me was that I didn't get cast in a show. But it actually turned out to be the best thing ever, because that basically changed actually the course of my life. Because not being in one production meant that I got to work backstage for something else. And that was the first time that there was a costume construction class taught, and the world of the arts was even more opened to me. And I realized that just because I thought I was going down a certain path. Everything changed, and I just basically like made a different turn. I was still going down the same highway, but I just changed lanes a little bit. So I just readjusted my focus, and it was the best thing ever. So let's see. I was always kind of a crafty person too. So a long time ago, my mom, as I was homeschooled, realized that she could read things to me and I would listen to them, but I had to be doing something with my hands. It was really frustrating for me to just be sitting still. And so for as long as I can remember, I'm doodling, or I'm folding paper, or I'm knitting, or something that is just something that I can be doing with my hands. And so audiobooks are a great thing if you're that kind of kid too. And so that's music. I listen to a lot of musicals just by crafting and painting a dresser and other things like that. So yeah, it was, so while I was here at Bethany, like I said, I wasn't cast in a show, but my first training was as a performer. And so it's always made a lot of sense to me, even though not being in one production and then just scooching my focus kind of to the other lane, it still makes a lot of sense to me, because to me there's a very logical connection between performing and what you wear, because an actor has to wear costumes. And what I really like about being a costume designer is that I get to work with actors in a much different way than any other designer does. I get to hear about their feelings and what they think their character's favorite color is. And so we do all this. Pete talked a little bit about just like the process of analyzing things, and we get this text and we read these things, and if we read a script several months ahead of time, all we're doing is analyzing things and figuring out, okay, she needs to wear a red dress in this scene, but it needs to change in this other scene. But an actor gets a script too, and they read those things also. And so my job, to me, the most important thing is to help an actor literally just put on somebody else's shoes and become that person. And so I get to see all sorts of just like small discoveries. And I love asking an actor, how can I help you with what your job is? But it's like, is it a different kind of shoe? Or I just came back from the summer and it was an ensemble piece, it was Newsies. And I asked all the ensemble people, there's like, what can I do for you that can be your face in the crowd, that is something special for you as a character? Even if you're just, a third kid from the left, do you have buttons and you like to play with your buttons? Or like, do you have patches and that gives you something that's personal and yet really subtle and maybe nobody really cares about? But I liked having that conversation with them. So it's all about creating a character together. Okay, but what do I do? What does a costume designer do? So like I said, I help create characters on stage. And aside from working with actors, that's even a little bit further down the road. But first, I just have to work with these jokers, who you already heard. And so when we hear, okay, great, we're doing this show and this thing, we've got to create that world first. And so what does that mean for me? It's a lot of research, it's a lot of Google image search, it's a lot of Pinterest, it's a lot of art books and magazines from the time and photographs, all sorts of things. So yeah, let's see. Okay, so this doesn't look like a lot, but to me this is potential. I got to go shopping. Another thing that I love about my job is I just get to go shopping all the time. And I'm the joker who's like touching things as you go and like feeling things, and I'm thinking, oh, okay, so that's back in style. So then 6 months from now when I know we're doing something set in the winter, okay, well great, Shopko had that on sale a couple weeks ago, and then I'll go over here and Target had that, and then I'll go to the Goodwill, oh, it's wonderful. Ask me about my thrifting schedule, you can always tag along. It's great. So yeah, so this is potential. So this one, that was all fabric from Tell It to the Wind. The one in the middle is Oklahoma, and then the other fabric is Women of Troy. I always like to do those before to kind of be like, does this look like anything? Well, it will. Okay. All right. So if you were ever to tell me that as a person I would be using math every day of my life, guys, I hate math. And my mother was a math teacher, which is just the most ironic thing in the world to me. And so what I have somehow in the left side of the right side of the brain kind of way, I've made my math creative because I have to. Because what I'm basically doing is creating body geometry that every person is a little bit differently shaped, and every time period has a slightly different shape to it. And so I think these are many different shows. And there's many different ways of creating costumes, but you kind of figure out the ones that you like the most or what every production demands. So there are some things that, sure, I'll go to Joann's and I'll buy the Butterick pattern and I'll cut it up, but then I'll decide, that's not gonna fit her very well. So I'll take it in here and I'll add a seam here and change it up a little bit. Or I might just start from scratch. If you've ever watched Project Runway, that's what they do. They do something called draping. And so the one, actually on this one, that one. That's a piece that's all just draped. So that was for our production of Music Man. There were just many ladies in the ensemble, and I wanted a way to kind of figure out a pattern that could fit most of them with some minor adjustments. And so it's set kind of in the early 1900s or so, and looking at a lot of the research is just figuring out where those curves go, where the seams go, where the lines go. The one in the middle, what was that from? I think that was for my thesis project over at MSU was Little Women. It was a musical and it was set in the 1860s. And there are no shows set in the 1860s, so we had to build it all. Which is really exciting to me because aside from being a designer, I just love making the costumes. And that's actually kind of rare when you get somewhere a little further out of either academia or just into the big bad world of theater. Secular theater. And there are people there are unions that you can be in and a designer can't physically pick up a pair of scissors, and that would drive me nuts. I just want to be in there in the trenches with all the stitchers and like, let's just make some stuff. So then the pattern piece on this side, that's a slash and spread. That's a beginning of a sleeve pattern. So basically, there's a formula using math to make a sleeve block, and you take some measurements that you take before you start a show of all of your actors, and sometimes they can be very detailed. And so this one I think was the top of the sleeve, and basically I'm making it a big puffy sleeve, kind of like the lady over on the side. So the cool thing is that here at Bethany, it's not just me, right? I get some help sometimes. I have friends join me down in the basement. I'm downstairs, and I can teach anybody. I learned myself. I didn't know, I kind of knew the concepts of sewing to begin with, but the very cool thing is that it isn't always just sewing. Sometimes these were pieces from Tell It to the Wind. Those are a little further down the hallway, but some designer, it was me, decided that everything in that show should be woven or quilted or pieced together because the show itself was so, it was just all these folktales from around the world, and so to me that meant that everything is pieced and everything is pieces of something made into something else. So you'll see some pictures of it. There's many of it around because I was very proud of that show. So then some of it was like, I've never made a loom before, so I had to do math again to get that circle that's down in the hallway too. But to figure out how many pegs do I have to do to get it in a certain circumference to go around somebody's neck basically and onto their shoulders. And there's 3 variations of it down the hallway, but that was a fun project. Here's a little closer. It's just lots of fabric scraps. We just ripped it all up. It's kind of wood to look like wood. I just made fabric into other fabric or textiles. Tell It to the Wind, also when I knew from Benji that when he was assembling all these stories, and he told me something that I really connected to is that all of the vignettes, all of the scenes are told in a slightly different literary way. So one is just dance, one was just dialogue, one was just narration. That to me was like, well then everything needs to be made differently, right? So certain things were woven, some things were knit, some things were just sewn like regular, so totally. Another thing I have done a lot, kind of painting wood to look like wood, I've made feathers a lot for a lot of shows. And so this is kind of the process of making that set of feathers in the back that was basically Cupid, the character in Metamorphosis. And I must have decided paper wouldn't, well, he was getting wet, basically. There's a chance that he could have had all his costume completely submerged. And so everything should be fabric, there we go. And so there was a lot of, because I wanted it highly textured, oh, my buzzword, I tried to make it so that, this side of the wings, you have 6 chiffon feathers on this side and then this side. So I was just, that's my basement floor, downstairs, right under here. And I was just on my hands and knees, being like 6 feathers and 6 feathers and 5 feathers and 5 feathers. So that was a fun process. Sometimes the fabric that I use is very easily recognizable. The dress, those were all tablecloths and curtain balances, because that's what I can buy for like $6 at the thrift store. And it was a little dress for a music man, I think that's what it was. Another thing, so I talked about research, right? So as we were doing the Christmas Carol, I thought, hey, I bet there's a knitting pattern for a nightcap that Scrooge could wear, and like, why not add another thing to the show? And so I found this really great knitted pattern in a, I think it was from, it's from the time period, but it was republished in a new knitting magazine. That's, so I knit too. Sometimes the fabric doesn't do all the work, and you have to make it do what you want it to do. So I can't know if you read all my captions, the Snapchats. So one of the purple dresses kind of down the way for Women of Troy was this really flat, so ugly. It was just so flat and there was no texture to it at all. I was like, this is really boring. So I had worked with a gal at another job in the years when I was done at Bethany and then hadn't come back yet. And so we were making crinkle fabric. And so basically I pleated it very small on all the edges and I bound it, it's kind of like tie-dye, but I bound it all up and I boiled it right in the kitchenette, and I boiled it and I boiled it. And because it was polyester, it basically like heat sets, it's like curling your hair. It heat sets all those wrinkles in, and then it came out and it was just perfect, so success! Also, because it's not always just clothes. Hey, there's John Russeth again, guys. Sometimes it's weird craft projects too, and kind of how Benji said too, it's just problem solving. And so, okay, great, so we gotta have some Greek gods on stage, and like, oh, they should have some armor. Okay, well, like, how am I gonna do that? So I went up to, there's a store in the Twin Cities, I go to the Twin Cities a lot to find weird crap. And it's a store fixture store, it sells weird things. And so this was part of a mannequin that I kind of decided, this was also a part of a tutorial that I found online. If you just type cosplay, all those cosplayers have great tutorials for stuff. So I modified kind of to suit our needs, but, and the materials that I had to. So this is Poseidon, and then a student was one of my awesome helpers, shout out to Claire, made the one for Athena, that's the one with the owl. So that was a slightly different technique, but it was still the base of, it was a plastic mannequin. We had John kind of jigsaw it apart, and I had to, so the far side, or no, this one, because it's a hard plastic, I had the heat gun, and basically had to stuff my dress form so that it could be the size of the actor, because it was like, skinny model size. And so with my heat gun, then I had to slash some holes in the side too to make straps. Hans was laughing, Hans Warren. And then the cool thing is like, it was just hot glue. Like most of it was done with hot glue. The one that Claire made was those moving stickers, like when you have a garage sale. I just bought her a bunch of those and she just went to town and like painted it beautifully. And the one is like, don't mix up your coffee with the spray paint. So don't do that. And so Poseidon, he got out of the sea, so he had to have an octopus. And so basically like the hard, the bigger pieces, like that piece, that was just the chunk of the plastic that we cut out of the arm's eye so that it would fit him. It just hot glued it out. I mean, I melted it, but it just stuck right on, so very cool. This is a little process shot of Tell It to the Wind over in our moon corner, the shorter moon dress. was kind of the process of being all pieced together. And so even though the moon was in a couple of different scenes, just in the background as the moon, I wanted this gradient to her stuff. And so since that whole scene was pieced together, why not piece some gray and to black down to the bottom? So the piece on the cutting table is actually the shape of the sleeve. And so some of the techniques for that show, some things we pieced all the fabric together just in big rectangles and then cut pattern pieces from that. And other pieces we modified the piece that we made, the piece of fabric of the pieced fabric into the more correct shape so we wouldn't have so much waste. Yeah, so that was pretty cool. And it was all just top stitched. So it was really easy for just about any worker to come in and say, hey, what can I do? And I was like, piece this together, please. So shout out to Caitlin Lang. She made that, the moon robe over there. Also, like I said, sometimes it's just using what we've got. So down the hallway are some really, if you take them off the wall, but don't, are some hats that I made for Music Man and other shows too. And they're just those really ugly, like net, kind of horsehair bridesmaids hats. I don't know why we got so many of them, but they're many colors. But if you starch them, basically, they are kind of stiff. And so using some very basic millinery skills, which is just hat making, I made kind of this fun, like, birthday cake hat that one of the gals wore as a piccolo lady. And then the other one, I actually think I forgot it over in stock, but Eulalie, the mayor's wife from Music Man, has a hat that's very grand too. I'll make sure to get that by tomorrow so you can look at it. But essentially it's just cardboard. Like it's a straw hat and cardboard and lots of hot glue and lots of hand sewing. So yeah. And then what's the next process? I do fittings. So I get to have the actors come in and I get to see if what I've made is maybe gonna fit them or what I have to do in order to make it better. So you can see Tessa Snyder on the side, and she was in process. That's part of that breastplate with the stickers colored. Actually, I have a really funny clip of Ruth wearing her Gertie dress, and she's just spinning because there's like 1,000,000 yards of ruffles that we hand gathered for that. I don't know why I didn't use a ruffle foot, but like, why make things easy? And then Joey, I think, just walked right into that suit, so he's giving a thumbs up. Another thing too is hair and makeup. Sometimes that's a thing that certain shows are going to need. And for Ice House, you saw some set pictures, but for this show, the ladies were all like moms. You know, they were just a bunch of moms, and they all had to have mom hair. So luckily, somebody a long time ago had donated all these really great mom wigs from kind of just, you know, a couple of years ago, and they just get to be just styled a little bit. And there's some techniques to use that can make wigs look really good, but luckily all these had bangs on them, so they could kind of cover where you might see a little bit of leather. I think that's all I've got. Any questions for me? Oh, look. Okay. Yeah, for me, on my part, because people had to wear the costumes, I touch them. That's cool with me. If you want to feel the texture, when I really like the texture, I say I want to rub my face on it. Like it's just I just want to feel it and like know how it like reacts and stuff. And so yeah, there are a lot of things that sometimes the fabric does all the work. Like here, the green dress over here for Lady Bracknell was just fabric that just screamed like I'm perfect. And then there are other things like the purple dresses that I had to do a little more alterations on. And some of that is just trial and error. Some of it is because the designer wants it, and all the time it's me. And sometimes we make things harder for ourselves, but that's just because we want it to really, really, really look good. Or it just makes me happy, so hopefully everyone else. So yeah. I guess that's it. Woohoo!
Will be available to talk one-on-one. Now there's a reception and there's some computers if you want to listen to more Benji stuff. And if any of you, a few of you students could help us get the chairs out and try to set them aside so we can mingle in the gallery. So, one last thanks again to the theater department for putting on this.
Thank you.